In this video, we'll dive into the role of the media plate actor and media material in virtual production, sharing insights I've gained over the past 2 years while I've been working on my film Beyond the System, which is currently touring the film festival circuit. This video will be fairly in-depth, so feel free to either watch straight through or skip around to the specific chapters as needed. Working extensively with the media materials and media plate actor in the sequencer has given me a solid grasp of the fundamentals. Though there's much to cover, this could easily be a 10-hour tutorial. For now, though, I'll focus on the key fundamentals I've learned while making an entire 16-minute film with this approach. If you're interested in a deeper dive into any of these areas, please leave a comment below and I'd love to explore more based on your feedback. The importance of the media plate actor. To the best of my knowledge, the media plate actor in Unreal Engine offers the fastest image sequence playback available in any 3D engine. In Unreal Engine, it's possible to achieve real-time playback with the media plate actor and media material while using Lumen and a single albedo map. However, I found that once you introduce multiple PBR maps, such as normal maps and subsurface scattering maps, which are really important to make a scene look realistic when it's lit by the Unreal environment, the frame rates drop significantly, even in a scene with a number of large materials and textures. Real-time playback within Unreal. The significance of this cannot be overstated. Why do I say this? The ability to manipulate a scene while seeing the results in real time allows for much faster iteration. However, even with the media plate actors in Unreal Engine, there's still a lot of keyframing needed to make the chroma keyed footage seamlessly fit into the environment, especially if the camera isn't moving. That said, if you don't need to bring your footage into Unreal, then you shouldn't. For example, if the camera in your scene isn't moving, you can simply export the background footage without the placeholder character and do the compositing in Fusion within DaVinci Resolve. Doing the compositing entirely in Fusion gives you more control over the footage from start to finish. Bringing your footage into Unreal introduces a host of potential issues, which I'll cover here and possibly in more detail in another section. Minor movement with the camera and tracking in Fusion. So another point to consider is that if there's no camera movement or minor movement from a blueprint actor with the camera, with just handheld camera work, for example, tracking everything in Fusion might be the best option. Here's a streamlined workflow of that. Export your CGI background from Unreal Engine, including the subtle camera movement within Unreal Engine camera. 3D camera track the footage in Fusion, then export the chroma keyed footage. Next, re-import that chroma keyed footage as a 3D plane. Adjust the scale and translation until the footage aligns correctly with the frame. This will require some tweaking, particularly with the scale and the Z translation, to ensure camera movement matches the character's position. When attaching an image sequence as a 3D plane, footage may not appear in the frame immediately. You'll need to adjust the position with the 3D space relative to the camera to fine-tune its alignment for proper positioning. Once everything is set, you'll have full control over the image sequence in Fusion. However, this process can be tedious and the real-time playback in Fusion is not possible. Completing this round trip for a single shot can take upwards of an hour. In contrast, if you export the chroma keyed footage directly from Unreal with all keyframes correctly set, the process can take less than 10 minutes to prepare for render. I recommend exporting the chroma keyed footage as an EXR file with the alpha channel enabled, then re-importing it into the camera track footage Fusion clip. This approach is effective because handling a complex node tree with both the 3D camera tracking and the chroma keyed footage can prevent real-time playback. By exporting the chroma keyed footage first, you enable real-time playback even with the adjustment layers, assuming that your system has at least 64 gigabytes of RAM, which is essential for this kind of work. There are plenty of in-depth tutorials on camera tracking available on YouTube that cover the topic far better than I could. For this reason, I won't be diving into it here. I recommend Everything You Need to Know About DaVinci Resolve's Camera Tracker by Jay Lippy. It's an excellent tutorial that provides all the essentials. Personally, I went through it about 10 times, and over that period, I managed to get a solid grasp on the concepts I needed to understand for my own projects, at least. However, if there's significant camera movement or the actor interacts with the CG elements, such as scenes involving a jetpack attached to an actor's back, it's usually best to render the media plate actor as a media material out of Unreal. In this case, the jetpack mesh and the media plate actor must be parented together and keyframed together to convincingly simulate the interaction. Although it might be possible to achieve something similar in Fusion or After Effects, real-time playback is limited within heavily composited scenes in both programs. Additionally, blending a CG element with a real footage requires extensive refinement and keyframing, making Fusion less practical, especially for a solo filmmaker like myself. Unreal Engine provides a real-time control which is invaluable for iterating quickly. A critical advantage when working with small team or solo in my case. Iteration speed is key for creating films in this way. Exporting with the media plate actor and media material. At first glance, the media plate actor or media material might seem like a minor tool, a simple feature to add to a project. However, it allows us to integrate CG worlds with green screen footage by syncing elements like lighting and environment with an interaction. Although it's not perfect yet, the potential, I believe, is far overlooked. It's really exciting, and because of that, I continually experiment and explore with it. Imagine a future where we could film actors against green screens, then seamlessly integrate them into 3D worlds with realistic lighting and interaction. Ideally, characters and environments would feel organically lit and blocked, enhancing immersive quality of virtual production using green screen. While advancements in AI might eventually shift us away from tools like Blender and Unreal, the core philosophy of merging real footage with CG worlds will likely remain a constant. And I think it is unlikely that we will not see an AI character outperform an actor anytime soon, although I may end up eating those words, as I am biased, of course, because I'm an actor. Current uses and limitations of the media plate actor and media material. Let's explore the current capabilities and limitations of the media plate actor. This feature allows you to import an image sequence into Unreal Engine, where it automatically becomes a media plate actor that you can add to the sequencer. However, extensive testing has revealed some limitations to me, and especially with my project Beyond the System, I've discovered these limitations. For instance, it doesn't support hidden shadows, which are crucial for placing shadows correctly in wide shots to make characters sit naturally within the scenes when using a masked shadow, for example. When working with chroma keyed footage on a flat media plane, it's often necessary to adjust shadows to match lighting angles. Unfortunately, the media plate actor doesn't support this adjustment. If you disable visibility, the entire media plane disappears, including the shadow, even if hidden shadow option is enabled. In contrast to this, using a media material on a plane offers greater flexibility. For example, you can add it to the sequencer, disable visibility on the plane, and enable hidden shadows. This setup allows you to display only the shadow without showing the character, which is often the desired effect. It's important to note, however, that shadows can currently only be generated with masked material setting. While there is an option in the material editor called Cast Dynamic Shadows as Masked for translucent materials, I haven't been able to get it to work. If anyone has suggestions how to make this feature functional, please share them below, because when I click it on now, the media material just disappears completely. Masked versus translucent materials. Masked and translucent materials each come with their own advantages and disadvantages. Translucent materials provide smoother, semi-transparent edges but cannot produce shadows, while masked materials allow for shadows but often struggle with edge quality. In my film Beyond the System, I combined both approaches, layering translucent and masked materials on two planes within a scene. This method achieved a balance of optical visual quality and, of course, accurate shadows with the mask material. So in this video, we'll discuss PBR materials and many different maps, but it's worth noting that I created the entire film by simply feeding the chroma keyed footage into the emissive color channel without any additional maps. This dual layering technique enabled clean edges alongside with defined shadows. However, be aware that this setup can significantly slow playback. If it causes crashes in the movie render queue, a workaround is to render two separate passes, one using shadow-only mask materials and the other with actors as translucent materials. So you do one at a time and then composite them in Fusion together. So another interesting topic to explore is relighting scenes with PBR, physically based rendering materials, using Switchlight Studio. You can process chroma keyed footage to obtain maps like albedo, roughness, specular. These maps enhance the realism of your scene when relighting in Unreal Engine. However, the plugin currently lacks control over aspects like roughness or normal strength, leading to a somewhat waxy appearance. If you want a separate tutorial on how I built out my media material, let me know in the comments. Creating a subsurface scattering material. To enhance the skin material, I experimented with subsurface scattering maps and it as a subscattering material, which mimics how skin absorbs and scatters light. So this process involves adjusting the albedo map by increasing the red tones and saturation to replicate the skin's underlying layers when applied in Unreal Engine. This map makes the footage respond to light in a more like realistic skin tone way, creating more lifelike results. To set up the subsurface scattering map, start by importing your albedo map from the PBR or Switchlight material. Then use a desaturation node and a 1-X setup to control the saturation, allowing you to adjust the intensity of the red tones. I recommend adding a color parameter to further fine-tune the red levels. Additionally, include a strength node and a contrast node for the subsurface scattering. Increasing the contrast helps ensure that, for example, only the skin tones are affected by the subsurface scattering, preventing clothes from behaving as if they are skin material, if that makes any sense. Alternatively, you can achieve this effect in DaVinci Resolve by increasing the contrast of your video footage and deepening the skin tones with a rich red saturated color. Setting up multiple maps in the sequencer. In Unreal Engine, using multiple maps such as albedo, normal, and subsurface scattering in the sequencer can enhance the lighting in your scene. From lots of experimentation after I made my film, I have found that these are the most important maps for getting a realistic lit scene by the Unreal Engine environment. However, adding multiple high-resolution maps can slow down playback, particularly when using high-resolution footage. If your footage is already perfectly lit and color graded, you may only need the albedo map, as additional maps increases the processing load within Unreal. Think of it this way. If your scene isn't fully set within the CG environment, introducing additional PBR material maps to the media material can improve this realism. To set this up, apply each map as media sources in the sequencer. Start with the albedo map for the base color, then add a normal map, and then add a subsurface scattering map, adjusting the strength parameters for each as needed. To do this, click Add, then Media Player. For instance, click on the albedo media source. And when you see the clip in the timeline, right-click on Media, select Properties, scroll down to Media Texture and insert the appropriate media texture for this image sequence clip. So all you need to do now is repeat these steps for any additional maps you're adding into your sequencer. And just remember that these maps need to be set up in the material you are using on the plane, if that makes any sense. So let's dive inside the material editor. So let's break down the media material setup, covering each essential setting: material domain, blend mode, shading model, and other toggles that are key for getting the results you want. These details took me time to figure out, but now I can share them so we can explore best the approaches together. Here's how you can get started. Material domain. In the materials section, set the material domain to surface. This won't change for the media material with the chroma keyed footage. Blend mode. You'll primarily switch between masked and translucent modes. Here's what to do. Select translucent and click apply, then change the setting from volumetric non-directional to surface forward shading. This setting enables the normal map to work with translucent materials. So next is translucency settings. For depth of field, you can turn on after depth of field on or off to control blur effects. Sometimes you'll want to disable depth of field to avoid artifacting in translucent materials. I suggest familiarizing yourself with the translucency pass toggle and using it as needed for translucency adjustments. If you're using a depth map or tessellation map to set up by enabling tessellation displacement for media material depth mapping, click nanite and then enable displacement map, fog and motion blur. In the translucency settings, enable apply fogging if it fits your material. You'll also need to toggle output depth velocity to manage motion blur artifacting. Adjusting this option will help control unwanted blur effects. Also, you may have some transparency priority problems, and enabling or disabling this option, depending on your scene, will fix these artifacting issues. Switching to masked mode. So some key settings in masked mode include two-sided and cast ray tracing shadows. I usually keep two-sided on, especially when casting shadows. Also, you will need to add your alpha matte of the material to the opacity mask. I'll cover the nuances of edges for mask materials in another chapter, but generally, this is my standard setup. 6. Unlit versus lit shading mode. In my approach, I recommend you using unlit mode with your albedo map connected to the emissive slot. I completed my entire film Beyond the System using unlit and emissive with just one map. When your scenes are properly lit, additional lighting layers may not be necessary in Unreal Engine. However, if you opt for lit or default lit shading model, ensure you use both a subsurface scattering color and a normal map to avoid flat or waxy looking visuals. 7. Lighting and film grain. A lack of subsurface color map can lead to waxiness in the skin tones. One workaround I discovered is to apply film grain in Resolve, which somewhat surprisingly reduces the effect of the waxy skin. To summarize the main setup. So, material domain must be surface, blend mode masked or translucent, shading model, subsurface for multiple maps, default for just the emissive map being used, lighting mode or translucency is surface forward shading, must be turned on. These configurations are the result of extensive trial and error, and I've found they work best for me, at least for the project that I did. I hope this provides you with a solid foundation to experiment with and refine based on your needs. Please do note that I'm still continuously testing and learning this material setup, as there are multiple options for playing back the footage within the engine. And a reminder that I still don't know everything about the material editor as a whole and media texture and media plate actor. 9. PNG Vs EXR Sequence and the black edge issue in Unreal. After extensive testing, I can confidently say that the EXR is a far superior format when importing footage into Unreal. The most significant issue I've encountered is that even with perfect key infusion, importing footage into Unreal can result in a black line appearing around the character in the media plate. I've found that using an EXR workflow between Unreal and Resolve produces much better results than using PNG. Even though a lot of people will recommend PNG, I don't recommend PNG. Though PNG is a lossless format, there is still a compression in the image, even if it's not visibly lossless. This compression seems to prevent Unreal from accurately reading finer edge details that are 0.2% or 0.5% transparent. So while PNG contains significant color information, the rendering process often degrades the fidelity of the edges. This issue is particularly noticeable when bringing in chroma keyed PNG footage into Unreal, where a dark line appears around the character. Although the EXR sequence also shows a black line at the edge, it is much less noticeable. Additionally, the PNG lacks the high dynamic range that might be needed in a more complex scene, especially for the color grading after the fact when it comes out of Unreal and then you're working in Resolve. To further mitigate this, I developed an erode edge instance parameter for both translucent and masked materials when creating media materials in Unreal. I believe the erode edge parameter is essential to make your footage look realistically placed in the scene. This effectively erodes the black line in both the camera actor in Unreal and in the final render from Unreal using the movie render queue. There doesn't seem to be any existing documentation on this specific issue, but in general, successful compositing depends on how seamlessly live action footage integrates into the scene. Without that, the result won't be convincing. Below, I've outlined a visual setup for the edge erosion in masked and translucent materials. While masked materials are great, they can result in very jagged edges, hard edges around the chroma keyed footage, which the edge erode technique helps soften at least. Here are the EXR alpha settings I use for exporting from Resolve, offering the best balance between file size and compression. After conducting over 100 tests, these are the settings I rely on for almost all my projects. Since I couldn't find a definitive guidelines, I hope this is really helpful to you, as I had to discover this all for myself. All I know is that I've landed on a file setting of size and compression that works for me perfectly, and now I don't change that. That's the great thing about Resolve. You set it and forget it in that regard. 10. Media plate actor, masked and translucent materials. Below is the node structure for my media plate actor and media material. While it's advisable to chroma key your footage before bringing it into Unreal for several reasons, here are some key points to consider. Computer performance. Chroma keying directly in Unreal will significantly slow down your playback. Control. If you chroma key in Unreal, you will have much less control over the image, including edges, colors, and overall quality, because it is a 3D engine. It is not working really in a 2D space, whereas in Fusion, you are working in that 2D space and only focusing on that 2D space and have all the controls for that 2D space. Efficiency. Pre-keying your footage before importing it into Unreal will likely result in fewer issues and a smoother workflow in general. I'd also like to mention that with over 5 years of compositing experience in After Effects and in Fusion, I never even once considered chroma keying the footage directly in Unreal Engine. In my case, there was no real advantage to doing so. Ultimately, it's useful to know in that this context, there are no real benefits to chroma keying in Unreal, and I suggest you don't either. So it does mean that you have to learn chroma keying in Fusion, but I think learning chroma keying in Fusion is worth the time investment, and then the overall quality of your render will be much better because of that. Translucent material for the media plate actor. Generally, you want to use a translucent material for the blend mode. This is because it helps retain the semi-translucency of the edges from when you chroma keyed the footage in Resolve's Fusion, for example, or After Effects. As shown below, I'm using a power node plugged into the opacity to create an erode edge. When you bring chroma keyed footage into Unreal, this method helps reduce the black line that often appears. Depending on the shot, you may need to adjust the edge erosion Typically find a parameter value between 1.2 and 3 works well to remove the black edge for me. It's surprising that there are no tutorials or documentation on this topic, but I believe it's one of the most important aspects of bringing chroma keyed footage into Unreal. So if there's anything practical you can take away from this tutorial, it's the importance of this edge erode parameter and how to make it, of course. It's quite simple. So when using translucency, there is a lot of things to cover on this topic. So I'll start by addressing the basics, and here's a few key settings you should consider. When piping the texture through the emissive color, I recommend using chroma keyer material function available in Unreal Engine's content. While it's not meant to act as a chroma keyer, it offers useful parameters to control white balance, gain, gamma, lift, and the emissive texture as a whole. Even though you should try and match the chroma keyed footage to the CGI background in Resolve before bringing it into Unreal, you still need to make adjustments after importing. This is because the footage will often come in flat due to it being EXR format. Even if the image doesn't come in flat, you'll still need to fine-tune the parameters for a proper match. 11. Masked material for the media plate actor and media material. At some point in your project, you will need to use a masked material instead of a translucent one. There are many reasons for this, and sometimes there won't be a clear answer as to which is better for any given scene. It largely depends on the specific scene and the shot, depending on the interaction that's going on and the various actors within it. For example, if you're doing a wide shot where realistic shadows of the ground are important, you may choose masked material because it can generate real shadows from your chroma keyed character. Ideally, your character should be front or backlit to achieve realistic lighting in this way. This way, your character will receive the proper shadow outline, even though the media plate actor media material is actually a 2D plane in a 3D world. You can further enhance the realism by using a larger, softer light source on the masked material, making the shadow less distinct, which actually tricks the eye into perceiving it as real. 12. Media material and media actor with side lighting. The issue with masked materials arises when your character is side lit. In this case, the shadow may appear thin, mismatched with the character's foot, or might not even be visible at all because the media plate actor is only a 2D plane. This is all dependent on the angle of the 2D plane. You might think about rebuilding the shadow painstakingly in a compositing software like Fusion, and you can do that, but this can be a huge amount of work to make it look realistic. So when it comes to creating floor shadows, I would highly recommend that you try and make them in Unreal, as they will be more accurate than Fusion anyways. For example, you can always just make the floor shadows in Fusion and then actually do the rest of the compositing in Fusion, etc. the footage of the actor with the CGI environment as a backdrop, as in you bring them in separately and then composite them together in Fusion. An alternative that I discovered is to create a fake mask shadow using a still media texture instead of the media plate actor material. So in this case, it's just a still image. So to do this, set the material plane's visibility to off and enable dynamic and hidden shadows. You can use the output from the chroma keyed actor and then keyframe the fake shadow to align with the actor's feet. This method works best with a soft light source. In the below case, I actually used my own outline from a still frame. So I just keyframed that still image of the shadow to each of those feet, if that makes any sense. Another approach that I figured out is to use a stand-in mannequin character. You can use the one in Unreal with its visibility turned off while keeping hidden shadows enabled. You would then match the mannequin's footsteps with those of the chroma keyed footage to simulate the steps and shadows effectively. So whichever method you choose, you will likely spend a significant amount of time keyframing to ensure fake shadows match your chroma keyed footage of the character. In the future, I hope AI generated realistic shadows will help avoid this tedious process. but the principle that you're learning now will still apply, I assume. I've experimented with AI generated foot shadows in Photoshop, but it altered the shoes in the process, which obviously doesn't make any sense. And then of course you need to be able to move those shadows. So you'd have to generate multiple shadows in Photoshop. It just didn't work. Masked materials and edge issues and problem solving. The biggest issue when using a masked material for chroma keyed footage in Unreal is managing the edges. Unlike translucent materials, masked materials don't allow partial transparency at the edges. For instance, while translucent materials work relatively well for hair in Unreal, maintaining the look of flowing hair strands, for example, they don't achieve the quality you'd get if everything were composited in a program like Fusion. With masked materials, however, you have to use an opacity mask, which makes the entire material either fully opaque or fully transparent with no line in between. This results in blocky, pixelated edges and hair details because a masked material cannot handle semi-translucent edges. Fortunately, there is no perfect solution for this. With masked materials, flowing hair just looks awful. So in practice and with my film, I generally avoided using masked materials on medium or close-up shots as they would significantly compromise the hair detail. Instead, I would use only masked materials when necessary. So masked materials become essential on many occasions, one of which is if you have translucent elements like smoke or water interacting with your media plate actor in the scene or in front of or behind, as these elements can interfere with edges, with the translucency and so on. So you need the masked material because translucent materials are overlapping with each other. So one workaround is to turn off output velocity in the material drop-down menu under translucency. However, this workaround brings other challenges, such as managing translucency material sort priority, which sometimes still necessitates a masked material, essentially. So in a situation where you'd prefer a translucent material for your media plate actor or media material, such as when you're placing smoke in front of chroma keyed footage of your character, sorting priority setting alone may not prevent transparency artifacts. So in my experience, using a masked material often becomes unavoidable in this case. So whenever possible, especially if the camera is static, compositing a wide shot entirely in Fusion is ideal. Smooth step for better edges with masked material. Now that we've established that achieving the same edge quality with masked materials as you would with translucent materials isn't entirely possible, there's a workaround I discovered to create somewhat decent edges with a masked material. After searching through Unreal Engine forums, Reddit, and YouTube, I stumbled upon a solution using a specific node for the opacity mask to address hard edges, black lines, and pixelated borders that come with masked materials. By using two scalar parameters fed into an add node for the minimum and maximum values, you can essentially erode the edge with one parameter and smooth it out with the other. And this is essential to get the masked material to look semi-decent. You need both. So that covers the media plate actor and the media material in the sequencer and how complicated it is. I'm sure I haven't covered almost everything you need to know about the topic, but if you need to know anything more, please drop me a line and I will get back to you as soon as possible.